At first, they thought it was thunder. But thunder doesn't dive out of the clouds with 8 blazing guns, tearing the sky apart at 500 miles per hour. German pilots used to laugh when they saw it. That bulky American plane they called Die Milchkanne, the milk jug. Too heavy, too slow, too stupid to fight their nimble Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. But when the clouds split open and the roar came, that deep, chest-rattling growl of 2,000 horsepower screaming through the air, the laughter died in their throats. Because once the P-47 Thunderbolt arrived, there was no escape. Not from its speed in a dive, not from its wall of fire, and definitely not from that sound. A sound burned into the memory of every man who survived it. This is the story of how ridicule became terror, how a machine mocked by both sides became the most feared aircraft in the European sky, and how the sound of thunder became the sound of inevitability. In the spring of 1942, the United States Army Air Forces had a problem. Their bombers were being slaughtered over Europe. Escort fighters couldn't stay with them deep into enemy territory. The Germans owned the sky, and they knew it. Something had to change. Republic Aviation's answer was unexpected. It weighed 7 tons. It was powered by an engine designed for bombers. It looked like someone had strapped wings to a beer keg and added a propeller. Even its designer, Alexander Kartveli, called it a fighter built around an engine, not the other way around. The P-47 Thunderbolt. When the first prototypes rolled out, the reactions were less than enthusiastic. British pilots took one look and nicknamed it the Jug, short for Juggernaut, though some said it stood for something else entirely. German intelligence officers saw reconnaissance photos and filed it under heavy fighter, negligible threat. Luftwaffe pilots joked that American engineers must have run out of aluminum halfway through and just kept building anyway. Even some American pilots weren't convinced. Lieutenant Frank Klibbe wrote home in early 1943, "They want us to fly this thing into combat. It climbs like a brick and turns like a freight train. The Krauts are going to eat us alive." The P-47 was 2,000 pounds heavier than the sleek P-51 Mustang. It needed a longer runway. It gulped fuel. Its rate of climb was embarrassing compared to German fighters that could spiral upward like angry hornets. In mock dogfights over England, Spitfire pilots ran circles around it. The joke spread through air bases from East Anglia to North Africa. How do you know a Thunderbolt pilot? He's the one walking away from the crash. But there were whispers, quiet observations that didn't fit the narrative. The P-47 could take damage that would tear other fighters apart. Its engine, the massive Pratt Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp, produced more raw power than anything else in the sky. And in a dive, when gravity became an ally instead of an enemy, the Thunderbolt didn't just move fast. It fell like the wrath of God. On April 8, 1943, the 56th Fighter Group escorted B-17s over the coast of occupied France. It was the P-47's first real mission over enemy territory. The pilots were tense. The Germans were waiting. And somewhere over the English Channel, as the formation climbed toward 25,000 feet, the deep, unmistakable rumble of those R-2800 engines began to shake the air. Every joke has a punchline, and this one was about to come screaming down from 20,000 feet above Germany. The first dogfight came without warning. Focke-Wulf 190S dove out of the sun, slashing through the bomber formation with practiced precision. The P-47 pilots broke formation, pushing their throttles forward, feeling the massive fighters lurch into motion. And that's when everything everyone thought they knew about the Thunderbolt shattered. Yes, it climbed slowly. Yes, it turned wide. But when Lieutenant Robert Johnson saw a FW-190 below him and pushed the stick forward, something extraordinary happened. The Thunderbolt dove, not like other fighters, not in a controlled descent. It fell, accelerating past 400, then 450, then 500 miles per hour, the airframe shuddering, the engine howling, the propeller screaming as it tore through the air like a bullet fired from heaven itself. The FW-190 never had a chance. 8.50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing, opened fire simultaneously. Each gun spat 800 rounds per minute. That's 6,400 bullets every 60 seconds, each one the size of a man's thumb, each one capable of punching through steel. The German fighter disintegrated, wings folded, tail snapped off. The pilot never even had time to bail out. Johnson pulled up, his hands shaking, his radio crackling with voices he barely registered. "Did you see that? Holy Christ! Did you see how fast that thing moved?" By the end of the mission, the 56th Fighter Group had claimed 4 kills, 0 losses. But it wasn't the numbers that mattered. It was the feeling, that moment when American pilots realized they weren't flying a joke. They were flying a weapon. Over the next few weeks, something strange started happening. German pilots began reporting a new phenomenon, not visual, auditory. A Luftwaffe pilot named Heinz Nocker wrote in his diary after an engagement over the Ruhr, "You could hear them before you saw them. A deep, rolling thunder, like a storm moving across the mountains. But it wasn't weather. It was those American juggernauts, and once you heard it, you knew you were already too late." The Pratt Whitney R-2800 didn't sound like other engines. It didn't whine like a Merlin or scream like a German DB605. It rumbled, a low, chest-vibrating growl that carried for miles, bouncing off clouds, echoing across the sky. And when a full squadron of P-47s dove together, the sound was apocalyptic. The air itself seemed to roar. The frequency was low enough to trigger primal fear, the same instinct that makes humans freeze at the sound of distant thunder or an approaching avalanche. It bypassed logic and spoke directly to the brainstem. Something massive is coming, and you cannot stop it. American pilots started to notice it too. Captain Francis Gabreski recalled, "We'd climb to altitude, everything quiet except the engine hum. Then someone would call bandits, and 8 of us would roll into a dive together. That's when I'd hear it, not just my engine, but all of them, harmonizing into this roar. It made you feel invincible, like you were riding thunder itself." The Germans stopped laughing. By summer 1943, Luftwaffe intelligence briefings included a new section, Tactical Response to Republic P-47 Engagement. The advice was blunt. Avoid prolonged engagement. Do not allow diving attacks. Break contact if possible. But breaking contact wasn't always possible. On June 26, 1943, Robert Johnson, the same pilot from that first dogfight, encountered a German fighter group over France. What happened next became legend. His P-47 was hit, then hit again and again. Cannon shells tore through the fuselage. Machine gun rounds shredded the tail. Pieces of the aircraft peeled away in the slipstream. The canopy shattered. Fuel streamed from punctured tanks. Johnson stayed conscious, stayed in control. And somehow, impossibly, the Thunderbolt kept flying. He counted later. Over 200 bullet holes. Half his rudder gone. Hydraulic fluid painting the cockpit. But the R-2800 engine never missed a beat. And the airframe, overbuilt, overweight, over-engineered, held together through physics that should have killed him. He made it back to England, landed, climbed out, stared at the wreckage that had been his aircraft, and started laughing. Because the Germans were right about one thing: the P-47 was built like a brick. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand until it was too late, was that sometimes you wanted a brick, especially when that brick could dive at 500 miles per hour, carry 8 machine guns, and absorb punishment that would vaporize anything else in the sky. The sound of the Thunderbolt was no longer a curiosity. It was a warning. And across occupied Europe, from the forests of France to the fields of Poland, German soldiers and pilots were learning to fear it. Because when the sky began to roar, death was already diving toward you. By the fall of 1943, the psychological transformation was complete. The P-47 Thunderbolt was no longer just an aircraft. It had become an experience. A sensory assault that began long before the first bullet was fired. German infantry learned to recognize it first. A Wehrmacht corporal named Friedrich Weber wrote a letter that was intercepted by Allied intelligence. "We were dug in near Caen when we heard it, not the high whistle of Stukas or the drone of bombers. This was different, lower, deeper. You felt it in your chest, in your bones, like distant thunder rolling across the earth. Then someone shouted, 'Jabos!' and we knew what was coming." Jabos. German slang for Jagdbomber, fighter bombers. But by late 1943, when German troops said Jabo, they meant one thing: thunderbolts. And when that rumble came, men who had survived Stalingrad and North Africa dove into ditches, abandoned their posts, froze in terror, because they knew what came next. The P-47 carried 8 M2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns. Let that sink in. 8. Each gun fired 800 rounds per minute. Each round weighed 1.6 ounces and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, fast enough to punch through armor plating, engine blocks, concrete walls. When all 8 guns fired simultaneously, the Thunderbolt unleashed 6,400 rounds per minute, over 100 bullets every second. The recoil was so violent it actually slowed the aircraft in mid-flight. Pilots called it the hammer. Ground troops called it something else: the end. Major Hubert Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, described a ground attack mission over France. "We came in low, maybe 500 feet. You could see the German convoy clearly. Trucks, half-tracks, troops scrambling. I squeezed the trigger, and it felt like hitting a wall. The tracers walked across the road, and everything just came apart. Vehicles exploded, soldiers disappeared. I pulled up, looked back, and there was nothing left but smoke and wreckage." The sound alone was devastating. One German soldier who survived a Thunderbolt strafe described it as like being inside a thunderstorm where the lightning never stops. The roar of the engines mixed with the tearing, ripping sound of bullets shredding metal, wood, flesh. It lasted 10 seconds, maybe 15, but those who heard it never forgot. August 1944, Normandy, France. The German 7th Army was trapped in a pocket near the town of Falaise. 100,000 men, thousands of vehicles, all bottlenecked on narrow roads, trying desperately to escape the Allied encirclement. The P-47s came in waves, hundreds of them. Squadron after squadron, diving from the clouds, their engines roaring, their guns blazing, turning the roads into a killing field that stretched for miles. A Canadian soldier who witnessed it from the Allied lines wrote, "The sound was constant, not explosions, those came later, Just this deep, sustained roar, like God himself was grinding the earth beneath his heel. The sky was full of them, and every few seconds you'd see another thunderbolt roll into a dive, and the roar would get louder, and more fire would pour down. The Germans called it der Kessel, the cauldron. The French called it le couloir de la mort, the corridor of death. The P-47 pilots called it a target-rich environment. Estimates vary, but in the 2 weeks of attacks on the Falaise pocket, P-47s destroyed or damaged over 3,000 vehicles, 500 tanks, and countless artillery pieces. The roads became impassable, not from Allied ground forces, but from the sheer density of wrecked German equipment. Luftwaffe pilot Hans Hartigs later recalled, "We tried to provide air cover. We were outnumbered 10-1. The moment we engaged, more thunderbolts would appear. They were everywhere. You couldn't run, couldn't hide, couldn't fight. All you could do was listen to that sound and pray it wasn't coming for you next." The P-47 destroyed more than machines. It destroyed legends, German aces, pilots with dozens of kills, veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had flown since the invasion of Poland, began to fall. Not in glorious dogfights, not in dramatic duels. They fell because a P-47 dove out of the sun at 500 miles per hour and hit them before they even knew it was there. The sound was the only warning. By the time you heard the roar, the bullets were already in the air. Hauptmann Josef Wurmheller, a decorated ace with 102 confirmed kills, was shot down by a P-47 over France in June 1944. He never saw it coming. Oberleutnant Wilhelm Moritz, 44 kills, killed by a P-47 over Hungary. Major Erich Rudorfer, one of the Luftwaffe's highest-scoring aces, described being jumped by thunderbolts over Germany. "I was at 6,000 meters. I heard the roar before I saw them. I broke left immediately. Didn't think, didn't look, just broke. The pilot behind me didn't react fast enough. I saw the tracers, heard the gunfire, and he was gone. Just gone. If you heard that sound, you had maybe 2 seconds. That's all." By mid-1944, Luftwaffe training manuals included a section titled Akustische Bedrohungserkennung, acoustic threat recognition. Pilots were trained to identify aircraft by engine sound and to take immediate evasive action upon hearing the distinctive rumble of the R-2800. It didn't always work. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt had become the most produced fighter aircraft in American history. Over 15,000 would eventually be built. They flew more missions, dropped more bombs, fired more bullets, and destroyed more ground targets than any other Allied fighter in the European theater. But the statistics don't capture the feeling. They don't capture what it was like for a German tank commander to hear that rumble and know, with absolute certainty, that his war was about to end badly. They don't capture what it was like for American bomber crews to look out and see those big, ugly juggernauts flying beside them and feel, for the first time in months, safe. They don't capture the moment when fear became sound, and sound became a weapon as powerful as any bomb or bullet. The sky roared, the earth shook, and men learned that thunder wasn't just a sound, it was a sentence. But every storm leaves wreckage, and the Thunderbolt, for all its power, for all its success, came with a cost that couldn't be measured in tonnage destroyed or missions flown. Captain William Dunham flew 96 combat missions in a P-47. He survived the war. He came home to Iowa, married his sweetheart, had 3 children, built a quiet life. But for the rest of his days, he couldn't stand the sound of thunder. "It's not the same," he told a journalist in 1982. "Real thunder is just noise. But when I hear it, I'm back there. I'm 22 years old again, my hands are shaking on the stick, and I'm watching another convoy turn into fire and smoke. I can still hear the engines, all of them, together. I dream about it. That roar. I don't think I'll ever unhear it." The psychological toll on the pilots was immense. They flew multiple missions a day, sometimes 3 or 4 sorties in 12 hours. They saw their friends die, not in glorious aerial combat, but in stupid random ways. Flak bursts, engine failures, mid-air collisions in cloud banks. They strafed trains and watched German soldiers scatter. They bombed bridges and saw trucks plunge into rivers. They hit supply depots and turned entire warehouses into fireballs. And after every mission, they came back, landed, climbed out, and did it again. Lieutenant James Goodson, an ace with 15 kills, wrote in his memoir, "People think fighter pilots are fearless. We weren't. We were terrified. We just got good at hiding it. Every time you climbed into that cockpit, you knew you might not come back. Every time you heard that engine start, that deep rumble, you wondered if this was the day." The sound became complicated. It meant safety and danger at the same time. And then there were the others, the ones who never fired a gun, the ones who never flew, the ones who just happened to be in the wrong place when the sky began to roar. France, Belgium, the Netherlands. Allied nations, occupied but not enemy territory. Their roads and railways were the same ones the Germans used. Their villages sat beside the bridges the Allies needed to destroy. When the P-47s came hunting for targets of opportunity, they didn't always know what lay beneath. A French farmer named Jean-Pierre Leclerc survived a Thunderbolt attack on a German supply column near his village in August 1944. He described the aftermath in an interview decades later. "We heard the sound first. We knew what it meant. We ran. My daughter was too slow. The planes came so low I could see the pilot's face. He was aiming for the trucks. He hit the trucks, but the bullets kept going. They went through walls like paper. My daughter was inside. She was 7. His voice broke. "I don't blame him. He was doing his job. But every time I hear distant thunder, I think of her. And I think of that sound." The Allied command knew about civilian casualties. They had reports. They had estimates. They made calculations. Ruthless, necessary calculations about acceptable losses in pursuit of victory. War has never been clean. But for the men who delivered the thunder, the knowledge weighed heavy. Some carried it better than others. Not every pilot made it home intact, even if their aircraft did. Combat fatigue, what we now call PTSD, was rampant among fighter pilots by late 1944. Some crews reported pilots who flinched at the sound of their own engines starting. Others refused to fly low-level missions anymore, citing mechanical issues that medical officers knew were psychological. One pilot, name redacted from official records, was grounded after his 87th mission. He'd been flying for 14 months straight. During a routine training flight over England, he radioed the tower, "I can't do this anymore. I hear it all the time, even when I'm not flying, even when I'm asleep. That sound. I can't make it stop." He never flew again. The 56th Fighter Group, one of the most decorated P-47 units, lost 128 pilots during the war. 58 were killed in action. 39 were prisoners of war. 31 were listed as missing. Each one left behind a Thunderbolt, a machine that could take incredible punishment, absorb horrific damage, and keep flying. But machines don't feel. They don't grieve. They don't wake up at 3 a.m. shaking, haunted by the memory of what they've done and what they've seen. The pilots did. There's a photograph from May 1945. It shows a row of P-47s parked on an airfield in Germany just after VE Day. The war in Europe is over. The engines are silent. A mechanic sits on the wing of one aircraft, head in his hands. A pilot leans against another, staring at nothing. In the distance, actual thunder rumbles across the German countryside. A spring storm approaching. One of the pilots looks up at the sky, listening, then looks away. Because some sounds, once heard, never truly fade. They echo, through memory, through dreams, through generations. The Thunderbolt brought victory. It saved countless Allied lives. It shortened the war. But thunder always comes with a cost. And the men who flew it, who carried its power and its burden, paid that price in ways the history books rarely mention. When the war ended, the world changed overnight. Jets were coming. The propeller-driven fighter was already obsolete. The massive fleet of P-47 Thunderbolts, over 15,000 aircraft, the largest single fighter production run in history, became surplus almost immediately. Some were sold to Allied nations, some were scrapped. Many were simply abandoned at forward air bases, left to rust under the same European skies they once dominated. But something strange happened. The pilots who flew them refused to forget. At veterans' reunions, Thunderbolt pilots would gather and trade stories. But the tone was different from other groups. There was less bravado, less glory-seeking. Instead, there was gratitude. Robert Johnson, the pilot who brought his shredded P-47 back to England with over 200 bullet holes, became a successful businessman after the war. He was asked countless times about his combat record, his 28 confirmed kills, his status as one of America's top aces. His answer was always the same. The P-47 saved my life, not once. Every single time I flew it. He wasn't alone. Francis Gabreski, 28 kills, credited the Thunderbolt's ruggedness with his survival after an emergency landing in Poland. Hubert Zemke, who commanded the 56th Fighter Group, said in an interview, "The Mustang was pretty. The Spitfire was elegant, but the P-47 was reliable. When you got hit, and everyone got hit eventually, you wanted to be in a jug, because jugs came home." The survival statistics supported them. The P-47 had one of the lowest loss rates of any Allied fighter, not because it was harder to hit, but because it could absorb hits that would destroy other aircraft. Pilots called it the flying tank. They called it the unbreakable beast. But most often, with genuine affection, they called it the jug that brought us home. Today, there are fewer than 30 airworthy P-47 Thunderbolts left in the world. They're treasured artifacts, maintained by passionate restorers, flown at air shows by pilots who never fought in a war, but feel a duty to keep the memory alive. And when one of those restored Thunderbolts fires up its R-2800 engine and rumbles down a runway, something remarkable happens. The crowd goes quiet, because even 80 years later, that sound, that deep chest-vibrating roar, cuts through the noise of modern life and demands attention. Veterans in their 90s will close their eyes and smile, or cry, sometimes both. Men and women who never flew, who weren't even born when the war ended, will feel something primal stir in their chest. And, for just a moment, the sky remembers. The P-47's legacy extends far beyond nostalgia. It established the template for modern close-air support. The A-10 Warthog, the U.S. Air Force's primary ground attack aircraft for 50 years, was designed with the same philosophy: heavy armor, massive firepower, ability to absorb damage, and keep fighting. The tactics developed by Thunderbolt pilots, dive bombing, skip bombing, train busting, coordinated ground attack, became doctrine, studied and refined across generations. The lessons learned from its rugged construction influenced aircraft design for decades. Redundant systems, fail-safes, the understanding that in combat, surviving is as important as performing. Major General William Maumier, who flew P-47s in World War II and later commanded air forces in Vietnam, wrote, "We learned from the Thunderbolt that sometimes the best weapon isn't the fastest or the prettiest. Sometimes it's the one that gets the job done and brings your people home." That's a lesson we keep having to relearn. There's a memorial outside the American Air Museum at Duxford, England. It's a simple stone with a brass plaque. At the base, someone has placed a small speaker that, when activated, plays a recording. The sound of a P-47 Thunderbolt at full throttle. Visitors stop. Listen. Some take photos. Some just stand there, absorbing it. An elderly man was once photographed there, standing at attention, tears streaming down his face. A journalist approached, asked if he was okay. The man nodded. "I flew Lancasters," he said. "British heavy bombers. We got shot to pieces over Hamburg in '43. We were going down. Then we heard that sound, that beautiful American thunder. 6 jugs came out of nowhere and cleared the sky. They got us home." He paused, listened to the recording again. "I hear people say it was an ugly plane. They're wrong. To me, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. The Germans feared it. The Luftwaffe learned to run from it. Ground troops across Europe would dive for cover at the first rumble of its approach. But the Americans who flew it, who trusted it with their lives, who brought it home, mission after impossible mission, they loved it. Not for glory, not for speed or elegance or the romance of aerial combat. They loved it because it worked, because it was honest, because it was exactly what it looked like. A massive, powerful, unstoppable machine that did its job and kept them alive while they did theirs. The P-47 Thunderbolt flew 546,000 combat sorties in the European theater. It destroyed 7,067 enemy aircraft, 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railroad cars, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. But perhaps the most important number is this: it brought home over 15,000 pilots who might otherwise have never seen their families again. That's the legacy. Not the mockery it endured, not the fear it inspired, not even the victories it secured. The legacy is in the men who climbed into that cockpit, heard that engine roar to life, and knew, with absolute certainty, that no matter what hell they flew into, this machine would fight like hell to get them out. Somewhere over Pennsylvania, a restored P-47 is climbing toward 10,000 feet. The pilot, a civilian, a volunteer, a guardian of history, pushes the throttle forward. The Pratt and Whitney R-2800 responds. The propeller bites the air. And that sound, that deep, unmistakable, impossible-to-forget roar, rolls across the countryside. People on the ground stop what they're doing, look up, listen. They don't know why it moves them. But somewhere in their bones, in some inherited memory, they understand. Thunder is coming, and for those who remember, for those who flew, for those who heard it in their darkest moments and knew they would survive. The sky is roaring again, and somewhere an old pilot is smiling. The Germans laughed at the P-47 Thunderbolt until the sky began to roar, and then they stopped laughing forever.